Gang stalking, electronic harassment, or voice to skull is always going to win for pretty much a long time to come. It's been a problem. It's been around for a long time. Simply because it's a money-making scheme. There's somebody, whoever it is, that's behind this sort of thing, for a given target, whether it's a medical experiment or police or um, intelligence services. Um, it's going to be around for a while. Simply because the stakeholders are not going to want to do anything about it. So it's up to the victims. It's up to us as victims to sort of trying to step up a gear, trying to see what we can, what control or what we can do to make the things go faster. Um, a lot of the victims do a good job by contributing to blogs, videos, but we're pretty much still expecting the problem to just go away. I think it's going to have to be a little bit more than just blogging. An average new victim takes them 3 to 4 years to sort of finally understand that all of these pieces are coming together. So, it's up to victims that know what's going on to sort of try and help and try and do a little bit more than just blogging. Um, if nothing is done, it's if we just sit back and expect government to finally turn around or whoever, it's going to have to take a lot of people dying, around about 25% of the workforce, and this might take a good 10, 15, 20 years. This is a standard calculation. It's a compound interest type of calculation that you can play around with, and point there being that something needs to be done today. Something needs to be done sort of more or less urgently, and it's only going to be the victims. Again, nobody's going to want to step in. Nobody's going to want to help. Everybody's in denial. Everybody is saying this problem doesn't exist. So in terms of highlighting or trying to get almost like a numerical view of how much progress has been made, it's always nice to come up with a definition of like where are we, what kind of generation are we, what are we doing today that's different from maybe 5 to 10 years ago, and what can we do like maybe 5 years from now that's probably going to help speed up a solution. So in coming up with the definition of a generation, can always look at the way in which information is being shared, how long it takes for a new victim, sort of get hold of that information and make use of it. If that victim has got a support system, and how many victims are there. And also, from like the point of view of a perpetrator, what technology they're using to carry out the gang stalking in the general public. So we start off with the dinosaur age. This is where the victim had no chance. If you were a victim in this sort of time area, you were just a victim and nothing else was going to help you. There was no way for you to come out of this, simply because there was no information back then in 2006 or 1995 or whichever year it was before sort of the big internet as we know it today came out. So as a perpetrator, if you were making a profit, or if you were making a killing, if you were making money out of all of this sort of thing, it was the golden era for you. Nobody was ever going to believe the victim. You could just label all victims as crazy. And then, along came YouTube, Facebook, blogging, and all the nice stuff that we have today. So it's very easy for anybody to create a story, just share their experiences online. And also, there's no reliance on mainstream media. Mainstream media is not anybody's best friend right now. They're pretty much not ever going to report on this sort of thing. And I think the picture has got to be very clear for most victims that we're going to have to become our own media. We're going to have to become our own information sources. Of course, the perpetrators are not going to just let this slide by, and they're not going to they're not going to give in easily. They're going to, if there's a blog, they're going to go there, a lot of disinformation and trying to pollute and try and fool everybody else that this problem still doesn't exist. Then there's a second generation, which is maybe I would say this is where we are right now. It's much easier for victims to start sharing stories. There's a lot of free blog platforms out there, and almost everybody is comfortable. Facebook has been around now for a while. Everybody's comfortable with the internet. It's not like a big wow or a big privilege. Everybody has got a smartphone. So this makes it easier for everybody else to gang stalk on a neighbor or somebody else. Meaning it's becoming a career option. Like gang stalking can actually be now a career option for if you just come out of college, you're a young teen or you're a young person, and things haven't gone well for you at school. Somebody offers you money or lures you without knowing, it becomes an option. So it's no longer just the police or government that's doing this sort of thing. It's getting spread out. Um, the question still remains: why is it still taking so long? I mean, we've got everything. There's all these free platforms where we can share information. Where there's still a lot of it's still a problem, and it's simply because most victims are not capitalizing on the technology. I mean, it's clearly not a technological problem. It's clearly not a problem of not being able to create a blog or create a video or anything. It's just that we're not fully capitalizing on this generation. And the other thing is that most victims are still overpowered by the targeted individual community is still completely overpowered by the perpetrators. Um, I mean, to be fair to the perpetrators, they haven't really changed their tactics much since maybe 50 years ago or 20 years ago. Still the same script they're using, still the same kind of tactics they're going to use. They're going to isolate a victim. They're going to use some kind of invasion of privacy. They're going to spread lies. It's going to be a psychological tactic. But yet we're still completely overpowered by this sort of thing. What's more is that gang stalking is becoming more of a business. It's almost like it's a booming career option. It's a booming industry almost in a way. And also there's still a lot of denials even now in society. There's still a lot of victims that are still struggling. The crazy card is still being played with so many stories, with so many testimonials that have been played out up to this far. It's comes across as a surprise that these sort of problems are still happening. I mean, there are some positives we can take from the second generation or the first generation. I mean, more and more people are catching on, and because the problem is getting widespread. If you can think of having to sabotage a friend's social circles, maybe another friend 2 years down the line, the same social circle, somebody general public is beginning to wake up and see that okay, it's not a mental disorder. This is something going on here. Core problem still exists, and having more victims and having more people dying hasn't guaranteed us any kind of victory. So we might have to do something. We might have to speed up our game in one way or the other. So what should the next generation be about then? I think in the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about information and maybe spreading awareness. And then in the next videos, I'm going to talk about maybe targeted individual community and maybe an evolving mindset. But the situation as we have today, there's already a lot of blogs, there's already a lot of videos. But the main problem there is that either the terminology is too hard to understand for a new victim, or that the content doesn't come across as credible. So we take a new guy who's beginning to be suspicious and is actually going online to find information. He's realizing that there are a lot of symptoms that are happening to him, and then he lands on some blog or some website and then talks about voice to skull, and then he probably asks himself, I've never heard this term before, and it doesn't seem like the real thing. And then probably his response is going to be like, no, this can't be it. This can't be the problem. And then maybe on the very same page you might find another perpetrator pretending or spreading misinformation and going, people are just crazy. So this is the world is seen by a victim. And I mean, from my personal experience, I started off suspecting that there are people that can see through my eyes, and that was my main thing that I was looking for online. I was searching for is there some kind of nano camera that you can implant in a person? Is there some kind of micro? I thought it was a camera, but I couldn't find that information, and it's because I mean the terminology is so hard. It's so well spread out. It's very difficult to put it together in one little thing that this is the kind of problem that you have, and you might be a targeted individual. Something like voice to skull or artificial telepathy, it's not as common as schizophrenia, and it doesn't sound credible. It doesn't sound like it's medically possible. And then if you come up to another term, which is remote neural monitoring, it also sounds like it's some kind of special research project. It sounds too technical. It doesn't sound like anything that might happen to a person. And then gang stalking as well. If you happen to be living in town or you're living in a relatively comfortable life, it sounds like something that's happening far away from you, like it's a gang, or it's got to do with drugs. It doesn't sound like something that can happen if you're living in almost a secure or comfortable life. So I think you know, as victims, the first area that we might have to look at in terms of getting better is just thinking about the terminology. Is it is it too removed from the victim? Is it most people are going to search for symptoms. They don't know what voice to skull is. They don't know what remote neural monitoring is. And if you land into a blog that spends almost also people's attention span. I mean, if I land to a blog, I've got a specific problem. Somebody can see through my eyes, and I want that to stop. I don't want to be spied on. I don't want to read a whole 500 words or whatever, a long blog about the history of voice to skull or whatever. And also, I mean, just being aware that hearing voices is always going to be about schizophrenia. Um, um, when we come to mind reading or seeing through people's eyes, as a new victim, you're always the first thing that's gonna hit your mind is this is like some kind of spiritual thing, or it's voodoo, or most victims are just gonna ignore this valuable information that's meant to help them, and then spend the next 2 to 3 years struggling and spinning their wheels and going on and on and on and on lost. So that's the first part, which is the terminology. That if we want to help people, if we want to help new victims, we might have to maybe soften the terminology a bit. And then also the quality and presentation of information. I mean, again, personally from my story, I spent maybe a good week trying to research and trying to find out what's going on, and I kept on landing on all of these websites and blogs that looked completely outdated. They looked like they were spam sites. They looked like they were, they're trying to, inject virus into my machine, or they looked out of place. They didn't look credible. They didn't look modern. They didn't look like a proper modern day site or proper site that I could trust. It's always bearing in mind that the user has got other sites that they can always visit. So if you're going to go set up a blog or some kind of information outlet, you're competing with another sort of slightly more credible site, slightly more mainstream site that's you're competing for attention of the user basically. And then unfortunately the mainstream media or the mainstream site is not going to talk about all ignoring the problem. They're not going to talk about this thing, that it is really a problem. And maybe the other thing for us to think about is the content of most blogs. It's fair that most of us are not professional writers. We don't write for a living. We're not journalists. We're not we don't sit 8 hours a day churning out articles and blogs. And it's really we're writing from our own pain, and we'd be writing from how painful this thing is, and how how difficult it is and how sad it is. But unfortunately we only write from the heart. It's not we kind of we don't seem to think about the user. We don't seem to think about the reader. We don't seem to think about the audience. And the content just seems to only either tell the sad story, like this is hard, this is terrible, or it's too long, and it loses the reader. It loses even a guy who's not a victim, or who's not even a targeted individual, and they go, no, I'm pretty much not interested in this sort of thing. So we're not. What I found is that again, I had this problem. I knew I had a problem in mind, and I probably just wanted in a paragraph or one sentence or two sentences, I wanted a solution. I didn't want to go read a whole long blog or sad story, or I didn't, So that's unfortunately the state of most of the information that we have as blogs or even videos. Again, we're not considering the competition. We're not considering that the user is probably going to go land on another site, which is probably going to tell him that it's you've got a medical problem. Meanwhile, he doesn't. It's the same story for videos as well. Again, most of our videos are a little bit too personal, and if we were trying to get the rest of society to understand or to buy into our story, I think we're gonna probably have to do a little bit more than just tackle the sad angle or the depressed angle, because I mean they're not having the problems, they're not the ones who are going through the pain, so naturally it's going to be very repulsive for them. They're not. It's almost like an Alcohol Anonymous meeting, where if you're not an alcoholic, you wouldn't be interested. You're just gonna go, not my problem. Good luck, and you move on with your life almost in a way. So same story. Videos they seem to be too emotional, or maybe they take a turn and they start discussing a religious topic, and there's not a lot of variety in how in the information that's being shared. There's not a, in terms of spreading awareness, you need a whole lot of angles to tackle this problem. And there's not a lot of there's not a lot of academic videos. There's not a lot of sort of that have taken almost like the boring approach, or you know. Okay, so I mean, how can we improve as a second generation right now? I mean, it's probably easier said than done, because there's probably a lot of cost involved. There's probably a lot of money. I mean, if you're using a free blogging service like I am, um, you know, you never it's never going to look as good as a site or a blog that somebody has pumped in a lot of money and is making revenue from generating adverts or something like that. But we can still try and make an effort. I think we should still be very conscious that our sites have just got to look a little bit more credible. I mean, if I'm sure there must be some victims. I mean, I'm sure not all of us are broke. I'm sure not all victims are completely like without cash. I mean, if you've got the option of creating a high-end video with a background, with a script, with everything well, neatly polished, I would say go for it as part of the new generation, as part of the next gen of, trying to get the message out in a slightly more convincing way. Or else we're still going to be in the same, almost in the same cycle now, where there's a lot of information, there's a lot of blogs, but they're almost all the same. They're almost all going through the sad angle, and it's all personal, and it's not, there's no other angle of telling the story. Okay, so in terms of information, I mean, just rounding up, it's up to us as victims to start to be a little bit more smarter and start to be a little bit more conscious. To sort of start thinking a little bit more about the quality and level of our communication, and even providing a variety of in which we can tell our stories in a slightly more convincing way. And in the next video, we're going to look in terms of just some ideas around the TR community.